The dust-laden winds of Redemption Creek carried whispers of judgment as Sophia Zimmerman clutched the eviction notice in her trembling hands. The year was 1875, and the small mining town in Colorado Territory had little mercy for a young woman alone in the world, especially one who couldn't pay her rent. The tears that streaked down her face carved clean paths through the dirt on her cheeks. Her once fine dress now patched in multiple places, a visible testament to her fallen circumstances. "You have until sundown tomorrow," Mr. Hollister, the landlord, had told her with cold finality before walking away from the small cabin that had been her home for the past 8 months. Sophia had come west with dreams as vast as the prairie sky. The daughter of a Boston merchant who had lost everything in a bad investment. She'd traveled to Colorado after her parents' deaths, armed with nothing but determination and the education that now seemed worthless in a frontier town. Her position as the school teacher had evaporated when the mine began to fail, and families started leaving Redemption Creek in droves. Now, at 22, she stood on the edge of complete destitution. She had sold nearly everything of value: her mother's silver hairbrush, her father's pocket watch, even the fine leather boots she'd worn on the stagecoach west. All she had left were the clothes on her back, a few meager possessions, and her mother's wedding ring, the last thing she would ever part with. The saloon doors swung open across the street, and Sophia quickly wiped her tears, not wanting to attract unwanted attention. Men had already made their intentions clear about how a pretty young woman might make her way in a town like this. She would starve before choosing such a path. "Miss Zimmerman?" Sophia turned to find Mrs. Parker, the general store owner's wife, approaching with a basket. The older woman's face creased with concern. "I heard about your situation. I brought you some bread and preserves. It's not much, but—" "Thank you," Sophia said, trying to maintain her dignity even as fresh tears threatened. "Your kindness means more than you know." Mrs. Parker glanced around nervously. "My husband doesn't know. He says we can't afford to help every hard luck case in town, not with the mine closing. But I remember when you taught our Billy to read before you lost your position." Sophia accepted the basket, her stomach growling at the scent of fresh bread. "I appreciate this more than I can say. I'll find work soon, I promise." "What will you do?" Mrs. Parker asked, lowering her voice. "There's talk that Mr. Hollister is turning your cabin into storage for the saloon." "I don't know," Sophia admitted, her voice breaking. "I've tried everything. No one's hiring, especially not a woman with no skills beyond teaching children their letters." "Well," Mrs. Parker hesitated, "there's always—" "No," Sophia cut her off firmly. "I won't work in the saloon." Mrs. Parker nodded, relieved. "Good girl. Something will turn up. It always does for the deserving." As the kind woman walked away, Sophia wondered if that were truly the case. In her experience, the deserving often suffered, while the unscrupulous thrived. She retreated into her tiny cabin, setting the basket on the rough-hewn table that was one of the few pieces of furniture remaining. She sat heavily in the single chair, allowing the tears to fall freely now that she was alone. What would become of her? Where would she go with no money and no prospects? The neighboring towns were no better off than Redemption Creek. A sharp knock at the door startled her. Sophia quickly composed herself, running a hand over her auburn hair and straightening her faded blue dress before opening the door. The man standing on her doorstep was a stranger. Tall and broad-shouldered, he wore the practical attire of a working cowboy: dusty denims, a faded flannel shirt, and a wide-brimmed hat that shaded piercing blue eyes. He wasn't handsome in the conventional sense. His face was too weathered, his jaw too strong, his nose slightly crooked from what must have been a break, but there was something magnetic about his presence. "Miss Zimmerman?" His voice was deep, with a soft drawl that suggested Texas origins. "Yes," she answered cautiously, one hand still on the door, ready to slam it if necessary. "Name's Mason Edwards. I own the Double Star Ranch about 10 miles east of town." He removed his hat, revealing thick dark hair with touches of silver at the temples. "I understand you're the former school teacher." Sophia nodded, unsure where this conversation was headed, but desperate enough to hear him out. "I've got a situation that might interest you," he continued. "My sister passed 6 months ago, consumption. She left 2 children, a boy of 8 and a girl of 6. They've been living with me since—" but I can't give them what they need in terms of learning. They need proper education. Hope fluttered in Sophia's chest. Are you offering me a position, Mr. Edwards? I am. Room and board at the ranch, plus a modest wage to teach the children. It's not much, but I'll take it, she said quickly, then blushed at her eagerness. That is, I'd be very interested in discussing the details. A hint of a smile touched his lips. Just like that? Don't you want to know more about me or the ranch? Mr. Edwards, I'm being evicted tomorrow at sundown. Unless you're planning to murder me in my sleep, your offer is the best I'm likely to get. He actually chuckled at that, the sound rusty as if he didn't laugh often. No murder planned, madam. Just two grief-stricken children who need someone patient to help them move forward. When would you want me to start? She asked, hardly daring to believe this stroke of fortune. I can come for you and your things tomorrow morning, if that suits. Sophia glanced back at her sparse belongings. That would be perfect. I don't have much to pack. As he settled his hat back on his head, Mason Edwards studied her with those keen blue eyes. Miss Zimmerman, I should warn you the ranch is isolated. It's hard country and a hard life. Are you sure you're prepared for that? Mr. Edwards, I've learned that life is hard everywhere. At least on your ranch, I'll have purpose and honest work. She met his gaze steadily. And please, call me Sophia. He nodded. Sophia, then. I'll be here at 8 tomorrow. After he left, Sophia closed the door and leaned against it, heart racing with a mixture of relief and apprehension. She knew nothing of ranch life beyond what she'd read in books. She'd never even ridden a horse without assistance. But she would learn. She had to. For the first time in months, Sophia slept without the weight of immediate worry crushing her chest. Morning came with golden light streaming through her window, and she packed her meager belongings, 2 dresses besides the one she wore, undergarments, a shawl, a hairbrush, a Bible that had belonged to her mother, and a few cherished books. Everything fit into a single trunk with room to spare. At precisely 8 o'clock, the sound of a wagon approaching signaled Mason Edwards' arrival. Sophia donned her best dress, still faded, but at least without patches, and pinned her hair neatly. She wanted to make a good impression on the children. Mason Edwards looked even more imposing in the morning light. He wore a clean shirt today, and his dark beard was freshly trimmed. When he lifted her trunk as if it weighed nothing, Sophia couldn't help but notice the play of muscles beneath his shirt. Is this everything? He asked, seeming surprised by the lightness of her trunk. Yes, she answered simply, not wanting to elaborate on her poverty. They were nearly to the wagon when Mrs. Parker came hurrying across the street, a small package in her hands. Oh, Sophia, thank goodness I caught you. She glanced at Mason, nodding politely before turning back to Sophia. A little something for your journey. She pressed the package into Sophia's hands. And perhaps for your new beginning. Sophia unwrapped it to find a small jar of honey and a clean handkerchief with an embroidered S in the corner. The honey is from our own bees, Mrs. Parker explained, and I stayed up stitching the handkerchief. I know it's not much. It's perfect, Sophia said, hugging the woman impulsively. Thank you for your kindness. As they pulled away from Redemption Creek, Sophia turned for one last look at the town that had promised so much and delivered so little. She wasn't sorry to see it disappear around the bend in the road. Tell me about your niece and nephew, she said to Mason, breaking the silence that had settled between them. Samuel is 8, smart as a whip, but withdrawn since his mother died. Doesn't talk much these days. Mason's hands were steady on the reins, his eyes on the road ahead. Emily is 6, opposite of her brother, talks all the time, asks questions I can't answer, cries at night for her mama. And their father? Mason's jaw tightened. My sister's husband was a gambler. Got himself shot in a saloon in Denver 2 years ago. Left Miriam with debts and 2 young ones to raise alone. His knuckles whitened on the reins. She managed to keep them fed working as a seamstress until the consumption took hold. I'm sorry, Sophia said softly. It must be difficult for you as well, losing your sister and suddenly becoming responsible for 2 children. He gave her a sidelong glance, as if surprised by her perception. We were close, Miriam and I. Only family we had left after our parents died. I'd have done anything to save her. He fell silent for a moment. The children are all I have left of her now. I'll do my best with them, Sophia promised. "That's all I ask." The journey to the Double Star Ranch took them through sprawling grasslands that stretched to distant mountains, their peaks still capped with snow, even in early summer. Occasionally, they passed herds of cattle grazing under the watchful eyes of cowboys on horseback. Each time, the men would raise their hands in greeting to Mason, curiosity evident as they glanced at Sophia. "Your men seem surprised to see me," she observed. Mason grunted. "Not used to seeing a lady with me. Some of them probably think I've finally taken a wife." Sophia felt heat rise to her cheeks at the implication. "I hope you've made it clear that I'm coming as a teacher. They'll figure it out quick enough. My foreman, Pete Lawson, knows the truth. He'll set them straight." The ranch house appeared in the distance, larger than Sophia had expected. It was a substantial two-story structure built of solid timber, with a wide porch wrapping around the front. Several outbuildings clustered nearby: a barn, bunkhouse, smokehouse, and what appeared to be a small workshop. It wasn't grand, but it was sturdy and well-maintained, speaking of hard work and careful stewardship. As they pulled up to the house, two small figures burst through the front door. The boy hung back on the porch, watching cautiously, while the little girl ran straight to the wagon. "Uncle Mason, you're back!" She skidded to a stop, staring up at Sophia with undisguised curiosity. "Who's the lady? Is she going to be our new mama?" "Emily," Mason warned, his tone gentle despite the admonishment. "This is Miss Zimmerman. She's going to be your teacher, like I told you, and Samuel." The girl's face fell slightly. "Oh, but she's pretty enough to be a mama." Sophia couldn't help but smile as she climbed down from the wagon. "It's very nice to meet you, Emily. You can call me Miss Sophia if you like." The child considered this, her head tilted to one side. "Do you know how to make cookies? Our mama made the best cookies." "Emily," Mason scolded more firmly. "It's all right," Sophia assured him, kneeling to meet the girl at eye level. "I do know how to make cookies, though I can't promise they'll be as good as your mama's. Perhaps you could help me sometime, and we could try to make them just the way she did." Emily's face brightened. "I remember what she put in them. Cinnamon and raisins and nuts from the trees by the creek. That sounds delicious." Sophia straightened and turned her attention to the boy still standing on the porch. "And you must be Samuel." The boy gave a barely perceptible nod, his eyes the same piercing blue as his uncle's, regarding her warily. "Samuel doesn't talk much," Emily announced matter-of-factly. "Uncle Mason says it's 'cause he's grieving, but I think it's 'cause he's stubborn." "Emily," Mason said with a sigh that suggested this was a frequent conversation, "why don't you show Miss Sophia to her room while I bring in her trunk?" The girl grabbed Sophia's hand and tugged her toward the house, chattering all the way about the ranch, her doll named Sadie, and how her uncle couldn't braid hair properly. Sophia glanced back to see Mason and Samuel following with her trunk, the boy still silent, but watching her intently. The interior of the ranch house was surprisingly comfortable. The main floor consisted of a large kitchen with a cast-iron stove, a dining area with a table that could seat 8, and a spacious living area with a stone fireplace. The furnishings were practical rather than ornate, but everything was clean and well-ordered. "Your room is next to mine," Emily announced, leading Sophia up a sturdy staircase. "Uncle Mason sleeps downstairs, 'cause he says he needs to be able to hear if anyone comes in the night. Samuel sleeps across from me, and that's Mama's sewing room at the end of the hall, but nobody goes in there now." Emily pushed open a door to reveal a modest but pleasant bedroom. A double bed with a handmade quilt stood against one wall, a washstand with a pitcher and bowl against another, and a small writing desk beneath the window that overlooked the ranch yard. There was also a chest of drawers and a simple wardrobe. "This is lovely," Sophia said, genuinely pleased. After her tiny cabin in town, this room felt positively luxurious. "Mama made the quilt," Emily said, running her small hand over the colorful fabric. "She made one for everybody. Even Uncle Mason has one, but his has eagles on it 'cause he likes eagles." Sophia sat on the edge of the bed, inviting Emily to join her. "Thank you for showing me around. I think I'm going to like it here very much." The girl beamed, then suddenly her expression turned serious. "Are you poor, Miss Sophia?" The question caught Sophia off guard. "Why do you ask that?" "'Cause Uncle Mason said you needed a job real bad, and your trunk is awful light. Our mama had lots more things. Before Sophia could formulate a response, Mason appeared in the doorway, Samuel trailing behind him with the trunk. "Emily, that's not a polite question," Mason said firmly. Sophia managed a smile. "It's all right. Yes, Emily. I am what some people would call poor, at least in terms of possessions. But there are many kinds of wealth in this world." The child considered this. "Like what?" "Like having a loving family," Sophia said gently, glancing at Mason and Samuel. "Or knowledge, or good health, or faith." "Or cookies," Emily suggested hopefully. Sophia laughed. "Yes, I suppose cookies could be a form of wealth too." Even Samuel's mouth twitched slightly at that. The closest thing to a smile she'd seen from him. "All right, you two," Mason said. "Let's give Miss Sophia some time to settle in. Lunch will be ready in an hour." As the children left, Mason lingered in the doorway. "I apologize for Emily's forwardness. She says whatever comes into her head." "There's no need to apologize. Children are naturally curious, and honesty is a virtue, even when it's uncomfortable." Sophia stood, smoothing her skirt. "Mr. Edwards." "Mason," he corrected her. "Mason, then. I want to thank you again for this opportunity. I promise I'll earn my keep." Something flickered in his eyes. Respect, perhaps. "I have no doubt of that, Miss Sophia." He hesitated, then added, "For what it's worth, I think you'll be good for the children. They've had too much loss in their young lives." After he left, Sophia unpacked her few belongings, arranging her books on the small shelf above the writing desk. She changed into her everyday dress, splashed water on her face from the pitcher, and re-braided her hair. By the time she made her way downstairs, she felt somewhat more prepared to begin her new life at the Double Star Ranch. The kitchen was filled with the aroma of cooking when she entered. Mason stood at the stove, stirring something in a large pot, while Emily set the table with mismatched plates. "Can I help?" Sophia offered. "You can pour the water," Emily said, pointing to a pitcher. "Samuel's bringing in more firewood. He has chores, but I'm too little for most chores. Uncle Mason says when I'm bigger, I can help more. But for now, I just set the table and feed the chickens." Sophia filled 4 glasses with water as Mason brought the pot to the table. It contained a hearty stew of beef and vegetables that made her mouth water. The door opened, and Samuel entered with an armload of wood, which he deposited in the box by the stove before washing his hands in a basin. They ate together at the kitchen table, Emily doing most of the talking, while Samuel focused intently on his food. Mason occasionally interjected with a question or comment, but largely seemed content to let his niece chatter. Sophia noticed how his eyes frequently moved between the children, watchful and protective. "Miss Sophia, when do we start our lessons?" Emily asked, helping herself to more stew. "We can begin tomorrow morning, if that suits everyone," Sophia suggested, looking to Mason for approval. He nodded. "The small room off the living area can serve as a schoolroom. It has a good table and chairs, and shelves for books." "Do you have any books for the children to use?" Sophia asked. "Some. Miriam had a few school books from her own days of learning, and I picked up what I could find in town. They're in the cabinet in that room. I'll take a look after lunch and see what we have to work with." Sophia turned to Samuel. "What subjects do you enjoy most, Samuel?" The boy stared at his plate, not answering. "He likes stories about animals and explorers," Emily supplied. "And he's good at numbers. I like drawing pictures and learning about faraway places." "Those are all excellent interests," Sophia said warmly. "Perhaps Samuel can help you with your numbers, and you can help him with his drawing." Samuel glanced up briefly, his expression unreadable, before returning his attention to his food. After lunch, Mason showed Sophia the room that would become their schoolroom. It was small but well lit, with a large window overlooking a kitchen garden. A rectangular table with 4 chairs stood in the center, and along one wall was a cabinet filled with books more than Sophia had expected. Miriam valued learning, Mason explained, seeing her surprise. She wanted the children to have education, even out here, said no child of hers would grow up ignorant of the wider world. Sophia ran her fingers along the spines of the books. There were basic readers, arithmetic texts, a grammar book, several volumes of history, and even some literature, Shakespeare, Dickens, Cooper's Leather-Stocking Tales. "This is wonderful," she said sincerely. There's enough here to give them a solid foundation. I'll need to organize the material into lessons appropriate for their ages. But this is an excellent start. And these were Miriam's, Mason said, opening a drawer to reveal a stack of writing paper, pencils, chalk, and a small slate. Your sister was a remarkable woman, Sophia said softly, touched by the evidence of a mother's dedication to her children's future. Yes, she was, Mason agreed, a shadow crossing his face. Much too good for the husband she chose, though I never told her so. She loved him despite his failings. Love can be both a blessing and a burden, Sophia observed, thinking of her own parents' devotion to each other, even as her father's financial misfortunes dragged them all into poverty. Mason studied her with those penetrating eyes. You speak as if from experience. Not my own, she clarified quickly, but I've witnessed enough to know that the heart doesn't always choose wisely. Indeed. He seemed about to say more when a knock at the front door interrupted them. That'll be Pete, my foreman. He usually checks in around this time. Pete Lawson proved to be a weathered man of about 50, with graying hair and a limp from what he cheerfully described as an argument with an ornery bull that I lost spectacularly. He greeted Sophia with old-fashioned courtesy, removing his hat and bowing slightly. Mighty pleased to meet you, Miss Zimmerman. The boss has been worrying himself sick over those young'uns' education. You're a sight for sore eyes around here. Thank you, Mr. Lawson. I hope I can live up to expectations. Pete, Mason interrupted, how's that situation with the north pasture fence? The two men fell into discussion of ranch business, and Sophia took the opportunity to begin organizing the schoolroom, sorting books by subject and difficulty. She was so absorbed in her task that she didn't notice Mason standing in the doorway until he cleared his throat. Sorry to disturb you, he said, but I need to ride out with Pete to check on some fencing. Will you be all right with the children for a few hours? Of course, Sophia assured him. We'll get better acquainted while you're gone. After Mason left, Sophia found Emily in the kitchen, attempting to sweep the floor with a broom nearly twice her height. Would you like some help with that? Sophia offered. Uncle Mason says I should learn to do things properly, the girl replied seriously. But this broom is awful big. Perhaps we could find a smaller one for you, Sophia suggested, taking the broom. In the meantime, would you like to help me prepare for our lessons tomorrow? Emily's face brightened. Can Samuel come too? He's in the barn. Uncle Mason lets him help with the horses sometimes, even though he's not big enough to do much. They found Samuel in the barn, sitting on a bale of hay, watching a mother cat nurse her kittens. He looked up when they entered but didn't speak. Samuel, Miss Sophia wants us to help get ready for school tomorrow, Emily announced. She has lots of books, even ones with pictures of animals. The boy's interest seemed piqued by this, though he still remained silent. Your mother left you both a wonderful collection of books, Sophia told him, sitting beside him on the hay bale. I thought perhaps you could show me which ones you've already read, so I'll know where to begin our lessons. Samuel hesitated, then nodded and stood, carefully stepping around the cat and her kittens. Back in the schoolroom, Sophia was impressed by how much reading Samuel had already done, despite his young age. He pointed to various books when she asked what he'd read, and occasionally shook or nodded his head in response to her questions. Emily, meanwhile, proudly demonstrated that she knew all her letters and could write her name. Samuel taught me, she declared. He's smart, even if he doesn't talk. Sophia caught the flash of embarrassment on Samuel's face. Intelligence shows itself in many ways, she said gently. Some of the wisest people I've known were those who spoke only when they had something important to say. The boy glanced at her, a hint of gratitude in his eyes. By the time Mason returned in the late afternoon, Sophia had prepared a basic curriculum for both children, organized the schoolroom, and even helped Emily make a simple drawing to welcome her uncle home. Samuel had remained quiet but attentive, occasionally writing answers to Sophia's questions on the slate, rather than speaking aloud. Mason looked tired but satisfied when he entered the house, his clothes dusty from the day's work. His expression softened at the sight of Emily running to greet him, drawing in hand. Look what I made. Miss Sophia showed me how to draw a horse that actually looks like a horse and not a funny dog. He examined the drawing with exaggerated seriousness. That is indeed a fine horse, much better than my attempts would be. Samuel helped with the lessons today, Sophia informed him as he hung his hat on a peg by the door. "He knows a great deal already." Mason's eyes found his nephew, who stood a little straighter under his uncle's gaze. Miriam taught them both as much as she could. Samuel was always quick to learn. "I'll prepare supper," Sophia offered, moving toward the kitchen. "You don't have to do that," Mason said quickly. "Cooking wasn't part of our arrangement." "I don't mind. It seems only fair that I contribute to the household beyond teaching." She smiled at Emily. "Perhaps you can help me. We could make biscuits to go with whatever's planned for tonight." The evening passed pleasantly, with Sophia and Emily preparing a simple meal of beans, salt pork, and freshly baked biscuits. Samuel set the table without being asked, and Mason, after washing up, joined them with a jar of preserves he produced from the pantry. "Mrs. Jenkins down the valley makes these," he explained as he spooned cherry preserves onto his biscuit. "Trades them for beef when we slaughter." After supper, Mason read aloud from a book of Western tales, while Emily sat nestled against his side, and Samuel whittled a small piece of wood into what was beginning to resemble a horse. Sophia mended a tear in Emily's pinafore, feeling oddly content in this domestic scene. It was nothing like the life she had imagined for herself, yet there was something deeply satisfying about being part of this small family circle, even temporarily. As the days passed, Sophia settled into life at the Double Star Ranch. Mornings were devoted to lessons, with both children making steady progress. Samuel remained largely silent, but he communicated through writing and gradually began to respond to direct questions with one-word answers. Emily thrived under attention, eagerly tackling new subjects and proudly showing her uncle her accomplishments each evening. Sophia found herself taking on more household duties than originally agreed, not because Mason expected it, but because it felt right. She discovered she enjoyed cooking with the fresh ingredients from the kitchen garden, and there was satisfaction in seeing the house becoming more orderly under her care. Mason never commented directly on these changes, but she sometimes caught him looking around the living room or kitchen with appreciation in his eyes. For his part, Mason worked from dawn until dusk, managing the ranch with quiet competence. He rarely spoke of his own past, though occasionally he would share stories of his and Miriam's childhood during the evening reading sessions. Sophia learned that they had grown up on a small farm in Missouri, that their parents had died in a cholera outbreak when Mason was 20, and that he had headed west shortly thereafter, eventually saving enough to purchase the land that became the Double Star. One evening, about 2 weeks after her arrival, Sophia was hanging laundry on the line behind the house when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Looking up, she saw Mason returning with his men from the day's work. As they passed, one of the younger cowboys called out to him, "Hey, boss, your missus sure is pretty hanging out them clothes. You're a lucky man." Sophia froze, mortified, as Mason's head whipped around. The young cowboy immediately realized his mistake when he saw Mason's thunderous expression. "Sorry, boss, I didn't mean I thought—" "Miss Zimmerman is the children's teacher," Mason said sharply. "You'll show her proper respect, Johnson." "Yes, sir. Sorry, madam." The young man touched his hat to Sophia, his face flaming, before spurring his horse toward the bunkhouse. Mason dismounted and approached Sophia, his expression apologetic. "I'm sorry about that. The men don't mean any disrespect." "It's all right," she said, though her cheeks burned. "It's a natural assumption, I suppose, seeing a woman on your ranch. Still, I'll make sure they understand your position." He hesitated. "I wouldn't want you to feel uncomfortable here." "I don't," she assured him. "Everyone has been very kind." He seemed relieved. "Good. We've grown accustomed to having you here. The children are thriving under your teaching." "They're wonderful children," Sophia said sincerely. "Samuel spoke a complete sentence today. He asked me about the Rocky Mountain expedition mentioned in one of the books." Mason's eyes widened. "He did? That's the first proper sentence he's spoken since Miriam died." The significance of this progress wasn't lost on Sophia. "He's healing, I think. Both of them are. They just needed time and stability." "And you," Mason added quietly. "You've brought something to this house that was missing." Their eyes met, and Sophia felt a curious warmth spread through her chest. For a moment, neither spoke, the only sound the flapping of laundry in the afternoon breeze. "Uncle Mason!" Emily's voice broke the spell as she came running around the corner of the house. "Samuel says there are coyotes near the chicken coop again. He heard them yipping. Mason cleared his throat. I'd better check on that. Excuse me, Miss Sophia. As he walked away, Sophia found herself watching the strong line of his shoulders, the confident stride that spoke of a man comfortable in his own skin. She quickly returned to her laundry, chiding herself for such thoughts. She was an employee here, nothing more, and it would be foolish to imagine otherwise. The next morning brought excitement to the ranch. One of the hands rode in with news that a traveling peddler was setting up his wagon just a few miles down the road at the Wilson homestead. He's got everything, boss, the cowboy reported enthusiastically. Cloth, tools, spices, candy for the little ones, even some fancy items for the ladies. Mason considered this news while they ate breakfast. I suppose we could ride over after lessons. There are a few things we need, and it would be a chance for you all to get off the ranch for a bit. Emily clapped her hands in delight. Can I get a ribbon for my hair? Mama always let me pick a ribbon when the peddler came. We'll see, Mason said, though his tone suggested the ribbon was already purchased in his mind. He turned to Sophia. Would you like to come along? It's not much of an outing, but it's something different at least. The prospect of a change of scenery was appealing. I'd like that very much, thank you. Samuel, you'll need to finish that reading assignment before we go, Sophia reminded the boy, who nodded solemnly. After a morning of focused lessons, they set out for the Wilson homestead, Mason driving the wagon with Sophia beside him on the seat, the children in the back. It was a beautiful late June day, the sky a brilliant blue overhead, and wildflowers dotting the grasslands around them. The Wilsons have been here even longer than I have, Mason explained as they drove. Came out during the first wave of settlers 15 years ago. Good people. She makes the best apple pie in the territory. And he knows every inch of this land like the back of his hand. Is their homestead prospering? Sophia asked. Mason's expression grew serious. They struggle, like most small farmers out here. The weather's harsh, the work never ending. But they're survivors. When they arrived at the Wilson homestead, several wagons and horses were already gathered around a colorful peddler's wagon. The peddler himself, a rotund man with a magnificent mustache, was doing a brisk business showing his wares to the assembled women, while the men gathered in small groups to exchange news and information. Emily scrambled down from the wagon the moment it stopped, eager to see the treasures on display. Samuel followed more sedately, sticking close to his uncle as Mason helped Sophia down. Mason Edwards! A stout woman with a kind face approached, wiping her hands on her apron. It's been too long since you visited us. Mrs. Wilson, Mason greeted her with genuine warmth. You're looking well. The homestead seems to be thriving. We manage, she said modestly, then turned curious eyes to Sophia. And who might this be? This is Miss Sophia Zimmerman, Mason introduced her. She's teaching Samuel and Emily. Mrs. Wilson's face brightened. A teacher! How wonderful for the children. They need learning, even out here in the wilderness. She took Sophia's hand. Welcome, my dear. It's always a pleasure to meet an educated woman. We're too few and far between in these parts. Sophia warmed to the woman's friendly manner. It's lovely to meet you, Mrs. Wilson. Come, you must see what Mr. Simmons has brought this time. He claims to have actual French lace, though I'll believe that when I see it. The peddler's wagon was indeed a treasure trove. Shelves and drawers revealed everything from practical items like needles and thread to luxuries like perfume soap and imported candies. Emily was entranced by a display of colorful ribbons, while Samuel examined a small brass telescope with longing in his eyes. Sophia found herself drawn to a shelf of books, most of them well worn, but still in good condition. She was examining a volume of poetry when she became aware of whispers and glances from a group of women nearby. That's her, one woman murmured, not quite quietly enough. The one Edwards took in. They say she was practically destitute in Redemption Creek. Well, she landed on her feet, didn't she? Another responded. Living in his house, playing mother to those children. Mark my words, she'll be Mrs. Edwards before winter sets in. If he'll have her, the first woman replied. They say she's too poor to bring anything to a marriage. No dowry, no family connections. Sophia's hands tightened on the book she was holding, her cheeks burning with humiliation. She had known there would be gossip, but hearing it so bluntly was painful nonetheless. Don't mind them, Mrs. Wilson said quietly, appearing at her elbow. Small communities breed loose tongues. They're just jealous because Mason Edwards is considered quite a catch in these parts. There's nothing to be jealous of, Sophia said stiffly. I'm employed as a teacher, nothing more. Mrs. Wilson gave her a knowing look. For now, perhaps. But I've known Mason for many years, and I've never seen him bring a woman to a social gathering before. This hardly qualifies as a social gathering, Sophia protested. In frontier terms, this is practically a ball, Mrs. Wilson chuckled. Now, let me show you these handkerchiefs. Mr. Simmons claims they're from Philadelphia, and for once, I believe him. Despite Mrs. Wilson's kindness, Sophia couldn't shake the sting of the women's words. When Mason approached a short time later, she was withdrawn and quiet. Is something wrong? He asked, noticing her change in demeanor. No, nothing, she said quickly. Have you found what you needed? He studied her face for a moment, clearly not believing her, but he didn't press the issue. Almost. Emily has her heart set on a blue ribbon, and I think Samuel has earned that telescope he's been examining for the past half hour. That's very generous of you. Mason shrugged. They don't ask for much, and it's good to see Samuel interested in something. They completed their purchases, the ribbon and telescope for the children, some spices and coffee for the household, a new knife for Mason, and, to Sophia's surprise, the book of poetry she had been examining. You didn't have to buy that for me, she protested when he handed it to her. Consider it a thank you for everything you've done for the children, he said simply. Besides, everyone should own at least one book of poetry. As they prepared to leave, the group of gossiping women approached, all smiles now, as they greeted Mason and scrutinized Sophia. Mr. Edwards, it's been too long, the boldest of them said. A handsome widow named Mrs. Fletcher. We were just saying what a shame it is you don't bring those dear children to town more often. Ranch work doesn't allow for many social calls, madam, Mason replied politely but coolly. Well, we're having a dance at the schoolhouse in 2 weeks' time, Mrs. Fletcher continued, undeterred. You simply must come, all of you, she added, with a glance at Sophia that held little warmth. We'll consider it, Mason said noncommittally. As they drove away from the Wilson homestead, Emily chattered excitedly about her new ribbon, while Samuel carefully examined every aspect of his telescope. Sophia remained quiet, the women's words still echoing in her mind. You're troubled, Mason observed, when the children's excitement had subsided into contented silence in the back of the wagon. Sophia hesitated, then decided honesty was best. I overheard some unkind speculation about my presence at your ranch. His jaw tightened. People talk. It's what they do when they have empty lives. They said I was too poor to bring anything to a marriage, she admitted, her voice barely audible. That I was fortunate you took me in. Mason's hands gripped the reins more firmly. That's Mrs. Fletcher's work. She's been setting her cap at me since her husband died 2 years ago. Seems to think the double star would make a fine addition to her considerable holdings. It's not just her, Sophia sighed. It's the perception. A single woman living in a single man's home, no matter the circumstances, invites certain assumptions. And does that bother you? He asked, his voice carefully neutral. Sophia considered the question. Not for myself. I've faced worse gossip in Redemption Creek, but I wouldn't want it to affect the children or your standing in the community. My standing is secure enough, he said firmly. As for the children, they're happier than they've been in months. That's what matters to me. He glanced at her. But if you're uncomfortable, we could formalize your position more clearly. Perhaps you could take your meals with the children separately, or— No, Sophia interrupted, surprised by her own vehemence. I mean, that seems unnecessary. We're not doing anything improper. Something like relief crossed his face. Good. I enjoy our evening discussions. The rest of the journey passed in companionable silence, broken only by Emily's occasional exclamations about her plans for the blue ribbon. As they approached the ranch, Sophia found herself thinking that, gossip aside, she felt more at home here than she had anywhere since leaving Boston. The following weeks established a comfortable routine. Mornings were dedicated to lessons, with both children making steady progress. Samuel was speaking more frequently, though still primarily about academic subjects, and Emily was developing a genuine love of reading. Afternoons were filled with practical tasks, Sophia helping with household chores, while the children had their own age-appropriate responsibilities. Mason was often away during the day, managing the ranch, but he made a point of being present for supper and the evening hours that followed. These became Sophia's favorite part of the day, the four of them gathered in the living area, sharing stories or reading aloud, sometimes playing simple games that made even Samuel laugh occasionally. One evening in mid-July, a violent thunderstorm rolled across the plains. Lightning split the sky in jagged bursts, thunder shook the house, and rain lashed against the windows with savage intensity. Emily was frightened, clinging to Sophia as they sat by the fire, while Samuel pretended stoic indifference that fooled no one. "Will the animals be all right?" Emily asked anxiously after a particularly loud thunderclap. "They're safe in the barn," Mason assured her, though Sophia noticed how he kept glancing out the window, clearly concerned about his livestock. "Perhaps we should read something especially engaging tonight," Sophia suggested, trying to distract the children. "Samuel, would you choose a book?" The boy selected one of Cooper's leather-stocking tales, and Sophia began to read, trying to make her voice heard over the storm. She was midway through a particularly exciting chapter when a tremendous crash of thunder coincided with a flash of lightning so bright it illuminated the entire room. The house shook, and Emily screamed. "That was close," Mason said, rising from his chair. "I'd better check." Another crash interrupted him, this one distinctly different, the sound of something large falling nearby. "Stay here," he ordered, grabbing his coat and hat. "Mason, you can't go out in this," Sophia protested. "That sounded like the old oak by the barn," he said grimly. "If it's fallen on the roof, the animals could be in danger." Before she could argue further, he was gone, the door slamming behind him. "Uncle Mason will fix it," Emily said, but her lower lip trembled. "Of course he will," Sophia agreed, trying to project confidence she didn't feel. "He's very capable." Samuel moved to the window, peering out into the darkness. After a moment, he turned back, his face pale. "Fire!" he said, the word barely audible. Sophia rushed to the window. Through the rain-streaked glass, she could see a flickering orange glow coming from the direction of the barn. Her heart seemed to stop. "Children, stay here," she commanded, already reaching for her shawl. "But Uncle Mason," Emily began, tears welling in her eyes. "I'm going to help him," Sophia promised. "Samuel, you're in charge. Keep Emily away from the windows and doors. Do not leave the house under any circumstances. Do you understand?" The boy nodded solemnly, his eyes wide but determined. The moment Sophia stepped outside, the wind nearly knocked her off her feet. Rain pelted her face as she ran toward the barn, her skirts quickly becoming sodden and heavy. The scene that greeted her was chaos. The massive oak had indeed fallen, crashing through part of the barn roof. Flames licked at the dry hay inside, growing despite the rain pouring through the broken roof. Mason and several ranch hands were frantically leading terrified horses from the burning structure, while others formed a bucket line from the well. Sophia didn't hesitate. She grabbed an empty bucket from the ground and joined the line, passing water from hand to hand toward the barn. "Miss Sophia!" Pete Lawson shouted when he saw her. "You shouldn't be out here." "I'm needed," she called back, continuing to pass buckets. For what seemed like hours, they fought the fire. The rain helped, but the hay burned hot and quick, and for every section they extinguished, another seemed to catch. Sophia's arms ached, her lungs burned from the smoke, and her soaked clothing clung to her body, but she worked without complaint alongside the men. Finally, the combined efforts of the rain and the bucket brigade brought the fire under control. The barn was damaged but still standing, and miraculously all the animals had been saved. Sophia sagged with exhaustion, her legs trembling beneath her. "You're shivering," Mason's voice came from beside her. He looked as exhausted as she felt, his face streaked with soot, his clothes drenched. "I'm fine," she insisted, though her teeth had begun to chatter. "Like hell you are," he muttered, shrugging out of his coat despite its wetness and wrapping it around her shoulders. "You shouldn't have come out here. It was dangerous." "The children are alone," she remembered suddenly. "I told them to stay in the house, but they must be frightened." "Let's go to them," Mason agreed, placing a steadying hand on her back as they made their way through the mud toward the house. Samuel and Emily were waiting anxiously by the window when they entered. Emily burst into tears at the sight of them, while Samuel's face showed naked relief. "Is the barn burned down?" Emily sobbed as Sophia gathered her into her arms, heedless of her wet clothing. "No, sweetheart," Mason assured her, kneeling despite his exhaustion to look her in the eye. "The barn is damaged but standing. All the animals are safe." "You smell like smoke," the child said, her nose wrinkling. "I imagine we both do," Sophia agreed, managing a smile. "We need to get into dry clothes before we catch our death of cold." "I'll check on the men while you change," Mason said, squeezing Emily's shoulder reassuringly. "Then, I think we could all use some hot tea." Upstairs, Sophia peeled off her sodden dress with difficulty, her fingers stiff with cold. She dried herself as best she could and changed into her nightgown and warmest shawl, knowing her other dress was being laundered. Her hair hung in wet ropes down her back, and she did her best to towel it dry before braiding it loosely. When she returned downstairs, she found Samuel stoking up the fire while Emily set the kettle to boil. There was no sign of Mason. "He's still outside," Samuel explained, using more words at once than Sophia had ever heard from him. "Making sure everything's secure." Sophia nodded, touched by the boys' increased communication. "Let's have that tea ready for when he comes in." By the time Mason returned, they had a pot of strong tea brewing and blankets arranged near the fire. He looked utterly spent, his shoulders slumped with fatigue as he dropped into a chair. "The men are seeing to the animals," he reported. "We'll assess the damage properly in the morning, but I think we were lucky. Could have been much worse." "Here," Sophia handed him a steaming cup of tea. "You need to get out of those wet clothes soon." He accepted the tea gratefully, his fingers brushing hers in the exchange. "Thank you. For the tea, and for your help out there. Not many women would have run toward a burning barn in a thunderstorm. Not many teachers would have," she corrected him with a small smile. "But I'm finding that life on a ranch requires adapting to unexpected situations." The children were reluctant to go to bed, still unsettled by the night's events, but eventually exhaustion won out. After tucking them in, Sophia returned downstairs to find Mason still sitting by the fire, now wearing dry clothing, a fresh cup of tea in his hands. "You should rest," she told him, though she made no move to retire herself. "So should you," he countered, gesturing to the chair opposite his. "But I find I'm still too agitated for sleep." Sophia settled into the offered chair, drawing a blanket around her shoulders. The fire's warmth was heavenly after the cold rain, and she extended her feet toward it gratefully. "You were remarkable tonight," Mason said, after a comfortable silence. "Most women of your background would have been hysterical at the mere idea of a fire." "My background?" she questioned, curious about his perception of her. "Boston society," he clarified. "I assume that's where you were raised, given your accent and education." Sophia nodded. "Yes, though we weren't as wealthy as you might imagine. My father was a merchant successful enough to provide a comfortable life and a good education for his daughter, but hardly part of Boston's elite." "What brought you west?" he asked. It was a question he had carefully avoided until now, seeming to sense her reluctance to discuss her past. Perhaps it was the lingering effects of their shared ordeal, or simply the intimacy of the fire-lit room. But Sophia found herself willing to share her story. "My father made a bad investment," she began. "He trusted the wrong person, a man he believed was a friend. He lost everything: our home, his business, his standing in the community. The shock was too much for him. He died of a heart attack 3 months later." "I'm sorry," Mason said softly. "My mother followed him within a year," Sophia continued, staring into the fire. "The doctors called it a wasting disease, but I think it was really heartbreak. They had been devoted to each other. And you were left alone," he surmised. "Yes. There was nothing left for me in Boston, no family, no fortune, no prospects. I had an education, though, and teaching was one of the few respectable professions open to women. I saw an advertisement for a teacher needed in Redemption Creek, and it seemed providential." "Until the mine failed," Mason added, filling in what he already knew. "Until the mine failed," she agreed. "After that, it was a slow descent into poverty, stretching my savings as far as possible, selling possessions one by one, taking in mending when I could find it. By the time you arrived with your offer, I was down to my last dollar and facing eviction." Mason was quiet for a long moment. "You're a brave woman, Sophia Zimmerman. Many would have given up in the face of such adversity." I considered it, she admitted. There were days when I wondered if continuing to fight was worth the effort, but something in me refused to surrender. I'm glad of that, he said, his voice deepening. The children would have missed knowing you, and so would I. Their eyes met across the space between their chairs, and Sophia felt a current of awareness pass between them. In that moment, she saw Mason not just as her employer or the children's guardian, but as a man strong, honorable, and undeniably attractive to her in ways she had been trying to ignore. The clock in the hall chimed midnight, breaking the spell. It's late, Sophia said, rising from her chair. And tomorrow will be a busy day, dealing with the aftermath of the storm. Yes, Mason agreed, though he seemed reluctant to end their conversation. Good night, Sophia. Good night, Mason. As she climbed the stairs to her room, Sophia acknowledged to herself what she had been denying for weeks. She was falling in love with Mason Edwards. It was a realization both thrilling and terrifying. He had hired her to teach his niece and nephew, not to become a permanent part of their lives. And despite the growing ease between them, he had given no clear indication that he saw her as anything more than the children's teacher. With these troubled thoughts, she finally drifted into an exhausted sleep, dreaming of fire and rain and strong hands guiding her through both. The morning brought clear skies and a full assessment of the damage. The massive oak had crashed through one corner of the barn roof, but remarkably, the structure remained sound overall. The fire had damaged one section of the hayloft and part of the eastern wall, but Mason's quick action and the heavy rain had prevented a total loss. We'll need to repair it before winter, he told Sophia as they stood surveying the damage while the children ate breakfast. But it could have been much worse. How long will the repairs take? She asked. With all hands working, maybe a week. The men are already cutting lumber. He glanced at her, a hint of a smile touching his lips. The hands are mighty impressed with you, by the way. Pete says you work the bucket line better than Johnson, and with a lot less complaining. Sophia laughed. I'm not sure that's much of a compliment, given what I've seen of young Mr. Johnson's work ethic. Still, you've earned their respect. That's not easy to do with ranch hands. His expression grew more serious. You've earned mine as well, though you had that already. Before she could respond, Emily came running from the house. Miss Sophia, Samuel says it's time for lessons. Are we still having school today? Of course, Sophia replied, grateful for the interruption. Learning doesn't stop for fallen trees or damaged barns. The next few days fell into a new rhythm. Mornings were still dedicated to lessons, but afternoons found everyone helping with the barn repairs in whatever way they could. The children carried nails and tools for the men. Sophia prepared extra food for the hungry workers. And even Samuel seemed to come out of his shell more, fascinated by the construction process. 4 days after the storm, Mrs. Wilson and several other women from neighboring homesteads arrived with baskets of food and offers of assistance. We heard about your troubles, Mrs. Wilson explained as she unpacked a pie from her basket. Thought you could use some extra hands and some home cooking. Sophia was grateful for the help, though she noticed Mrs. Fletcher was among the visitors, her eyes appraising every aspect of the Edwards home with poorly concealed interest. The widow made a point of seeking out Mason, touching his arm frequently as they spoke and laughing a little too enthusiastically at his comments. She's certainly determined, Mrs. Wilson murmured to Sophia as they prepared a meal for the workers. She's welcome to try, Sophia replied, keeping her voice light despite the twist of jealousy in her stomach. Mr. Edwards is free to court whomever he chooses. Mrs. Wilson gave her a shrewd look. Is that so? And here I thought there might be something developing between you two. We have a professional arrangement, Sophia insisted. I teach the children. He provides room and board, that's all. If you say so, my dear, Mrs. Wilson said, clearly unconvinced. But I've known Mason Edwards for 15 years, and I've never seen him look at any woman the way he looks at you when he thinks no one is watching. The older woman's words stayed with Sophia throughout the day, though she tried to dismiss them as wishful thinking. She was busy serving lemonade to the workers when Mrs. Fletcher approached her, an artificial smile fixed on her handsome face. Miss Zimmerman, isn't it? Such a blessing for Mason to have found a teacher for the children. They've been quite wild since poor Miriam passed. They're wonderful children, Sophia replied evenly. Very bright and eager to learn. Yes, of course. Mrs. Fletcher waved a dismissive hand. Children always are, until they discover more interesting pursuits. I've raised 3 of my own, all properly educated, and now making advantageous marriages. How fortunate for them, Sophia said, already tired of the woman's transparent attempt to establish her superiority. Indeed, I've always believed in the importance of proper connections. It's so crucial for children to be raised in a household with the right influences. Her gaze traveled pointedly over Sophia's simple dress. By the way, I couldn't help but overhear some discussion about your circumstances before coming here. Something about financial difficulties? How distressing that must have been for you. The deliberate cruelty of the remark took Sophia's breath away. Yes, it was challenging, she managed to say. But adversity builds character, don't you think? Perhaps, though I've always found that good breeding and proper background are more reliable foundations for character. Mrs. Fletcher smiled thinly. Well, I should check on Mason. He mentioned needing a woman's opinion on something in the house. As the widow sauntered away, Sophia fought to maintain her composure. She had faced snobbery in Boston after her father's financial ruin, but it still stung, especially here where she had begun to feel accepted. Don't let her get to you, Pete Lawson said quietly, having overheard the exchange as he came for a glass of lemonade. The widow Fletcher has been trying to get her hooks into the boss for years. She's just threatened by you. There's no reason for her to be, Sophia said, pouring him a drink with hands she forced to remain steady. Pete took a long swallow before answering. Begging your pardon, madam, but there's every reason. The boss hasn't been the same since you arrived. There's a lightness to him that wasn't there before. We've all noticed it. Before Sophia could respond to this surprising observation, a commotion erupted near the barn. One of the support beams being raised had slipped, and 2 men were struggling to hold it. Mason rushed to help, throwing his weight against the massive timber. The beam steadied, but as the men worked to secure it properly, a section of damaged roof gave way. "Look out!" someone shouted. Mason shoved one of the younger hands clear of the falling debris, but couldn't move quickly enough himself. A large section of wood struck him on the shoulder and head, knocking him to the ground. Sophia's heart seemed to stop as she ran toward the barn, heedless of the potential danger from additional falling debris. By the time she reached Mason, Pete and another hand had dragged him clear of the structure. He lay motionless on the ground, blood seeping from a gash on his forehead. "Mason!" she cried, falling to her knees beside him. "Can you hear me?" For one terrible moment, there was no response. Then his eyelids fluttered and he groaned. "Stay still," she commanded, tearing a strip from her petticoat to press against the wound on his head. "You could have a concussion." "The beam," he muttered, trying to sit up. "Is secure," Pete assured him. "Johnson and Miller got it tied off. Now lie still before Miss Sophia ties you down herself." It took the combined efforts of Pete and 2 other men to get Mason into the house and up to his bedroom. By then, he was more alert, but clearly in pain, his left shoulder badly bruised and his head still bleeding. Mrs. Fletcher immediately appointed herself nurse, trying to usher Sophia out of the room. "I've dealt with injuries before, Miss Zimmerman. Why don't you see to the children? They must be frightened." "I'll stay," Sophia said firmly. "The children are with Mrs. Wilson. Mason, do you want me to go?" "No," he said, his voice stronger now. "Stay, please." Mrs. Fletcher's lips thinned with displeasure, but she could hardly argue with the injured man's wishes. "Very well. I'll prepare some willow bark tea for the pain." Once she had left the room, Mason relaxed visibly. "Thank you," he murmured. "That woman exhausts me even when I'm not injured." Despite the seriousness of the situation, Sophia couldn't help but smile. "She seems very concerned for your welfare." "She's concerned for my ranch and my bank account," he corrected, wincing as Sophia gently cleaned the wound on his forehead. "Ow." "Sorry," she apologized, though her touch remained gentle. "This needs stitches. It's too deep to heal properly otherwise." "Can you do it?" he asked, his blue eyes fixed on her face. "I've never done it before," she admitted, "but I've seen it done, and I understand the principle." "I trust you," he said simply. "Better you than having to ride for the doctor in Dry Creek." With Mrs. Wilson's help, Sophia gathered the necessary supplies, a clean needle, strong thread, whiskey for disinfection, and a leather strap for Mason to bite down on. The children were kept downstairs, though Samuel had to be physically restrained by Pete from rushing to his uncle's side. "This will hurt," Sophia warned as she prepared the needle. Mason managed a crooked smile. "I gathered that." The stitching was a grueling process for both of them, Mason enduring the pain with stoic silence, biting down on the leather strap, and Sophia forcing her hands to remain steady as she drew the edges of the wound together. By the time she tied off the final stitch, her back ached from tension and her fingers were cramped. "There," she said, her voice shakier than she would have liked. "It's done." Mason reached for her hand, his grip surprisingly strong. "Thank you." She nodded, not trusting herself to speak further. The fear she had felt when she saw him fall, the thought that he might have been killed, it had clarified her feelings with brutal clarity. This was more than attraction or affection. She loved him, completely and irrevocably. "I should let you rest," she said, withdrawing her hand reluctantly. "The children will want to see you." "Send them up," he agreed. "But come back afterward, please." "Of course." The children's visit was brief but emotional. Emily cried at the sight of her uncle's bandaged head, while Samuel stood rigid with fear until Mason assured them both he would be fine. Sophia finally persuaded them to leave so their uncle could rest, promising they could return after supper. When she returned to Mason's room, she found Mrs. Fletcher had preceded her, sitting by the bed with an air of proprietorship that set Sophia's teeth on edge. "Ah, Miss Zimmerman," the widow said smoothly. "I've given Mr. Edwards his willow bark tea and was just telling him that he should consider moving into town while he recuperates. My home has plenty of room. And I have experience nursing the injured." "That won't be necessary," Mason said firmly. "I'm perfectly fine here." "But surely Miss Zimmerman has her hands full with the children," Mrs. Fletcher persisted. "You need proper care." "Sophia just stitched my head wound without flinching," Mason pointed out. "I'd say that qualifies as proper care." The widow's smile grew brittle. "Well, if you change your mind, my offer stands. Now, I should be going. The others are preparing to leave as well." She rose, smoothing her skirts. "I'll return tomorrow to check on you." After she had gone, Mason sighed deeply. "That woman is more exhausting than a cattle drive in August." "She's concerned for you," Sophia said diplomatically. "She's concerned about getting her hands on the double star," he corrected. "She's been widowed 3 times, each husband leaving her more property than the last. I have no intention of becoming number 4. The bluntness of his statement startled a laugh from Sophia. "You make her sound positively sinister." "Not sinister, just calculating." His expression softened. "Unlike you. You ran straight into danger today, twice once during the fire, and again when I was injured." "I couldn't not help," she said simply. "I know. That's what makes you different from someone like Lucinda Fletcher." He patted the edge of the bed. "Sit with me for a while, unless you're too tired." Sophia settled cautiously on the edge of the bed. This was Mason's private domain, and being here felt more intimate than any of their previous interactions. His room was simply furnished, but comfortable, with a large bed, a chest of drawers, and a small desk. On the wall hung a framed photograph of a woman who must have been Miriam, her resemblance to both Mason and the children unmistakable. "You should rest," she told him, though she made no move to leave. "I've been thinking," he said, shifting slightly to better see her face, "about what happened today. You were very brave, pushing that young man out of the way." "Not about that." He frowned, seeming to struggle with his words. "About how I felt when I opened my eyes and saw you there, looking so frightened for me. No one's looked at me that way in a very long time." Sophia's heart quickened. "I was frightened. For a moment, I thought you might be—" "I know." His hand found hers on the coverlet. "It made me realize something I've been avoiding for weeks now." "What's that?" she asked, barely breathing. "That having you here has changed everything. The house feels like a home again. The children are happy. And I—" He paused, his blue eyes intent on her face. "I find myself looking forward to evenings by the fire with you more than anything else in my day." Sophia didn't know how to respond. Hope bloomed in her chest, but caution held her silent. "I know this isn't what you came here for," Mason continued, his voice roughening. "You came to teach the children, to escape a desperate situation. I don't want to take advantage of that." "You wouldn't be," she assured him quickly. A smile touched his lips. Let me finish. What I'm trying to say poorly is that I care for you, Sophia. More than I expected to care for anyone, again after Miriam died. The children adore you. And I find myself wondering if there might be a future for us beyond our current arrangement. The words she had longed to hear, but never expected, hung in the air between them. Sophia felt tears prick her eyes. I care for you too, she admitted softly. Very much, but, he prompted when she hesitated. The things people have said about my circumstances, about my being too poor to bring anything to a marriage. I wouldn't want you to face criticism for choosing someone like me. Mason's expression hardened. Is that what's been bothering you? What small-minded people like Lucinda Fletcher think? Not for myself, she clarified, but for you and the children. You have standing in this community. I wouldn't want to diminish that. Sophia, he said, his voice gentle but firm, do you think I care about gossip? I've spent my life doing what I believe is right, not what others think I should do. The people whose opinions matter, the Wilsons, Pete, and the Hands, our neighbors who actually know us, they see what you've brought to our lives. And what is that? She asked, needing to hear him say it. Light, laughter, learning, yes, but also love. His hand tightened on hers. You've brought love back to a house that had forgotten what that felt like. Tears spilled down Sophia's cheeks. I was so afraid to admit how I felt. I didn't want to jeopardize my position here. The children need stability, and I need security, he finished for her. I understand that. Your life has been uncertain for too long. His free hand reached up to brush away her tears. I can offer you that security, Sophia, not just as the children's teacher, but as my wife, if that's what you want. Are you proposing? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Not very well, considering I'm flat on my back with a head wound, he said with a self-deprecating smile. But yes, I'm asking if you would consider becoming my wife, helping me raise the children, sharing my life, and this ranch. Joy welled up in Sophia's heart, so intense it was almost painful. People will talk, she warned, though her smile belied her concern. Let them, he said dismissively. We know the truth. This isn't about convenience or your circumstances. It's about two people who found each other when they needed it most. Yes, she said simply. Yes, I will marry you, Mason Edwards. His smile transformed his face, erasing the lines of pain and fatigue. He tugged gently on her hand, drawing her closer until their faces were inches apart. I've wanted to do this for weeks, he murmured, and then his lips were on hers, gentle at first, then with growing passion as she responded eagerly. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Mason's eyes were dark with emotion. I love you, Sophia Zimmerman, have since the day you stood in front of me in that cabin in Redemption Creek, too proud to admit your desperation, but brave enough to take a chance on a stranger. I love you too, she whispered against his lips. More than I thought possible. They might have continued in this vein, indefinitely had the door not creaked open, revealing Emily's curious face. Uncle Mason, are you kissing Miss Sophia? She asked, her eyes wide. Yes, I am, Mason admitted without embarrassment. Or I was until someone interrupted us. The child giggled. Does that mean she's going to be our new mama? Sophia and Mason exchanged glances. Would you like that? Sophia asked carefully. Yes, Emily exclaimed, rushing into the room and throwing herself at Sophia. Samuel wants it too, but he's too shy to say so. Is he now? Mason asked, amusement in his voice. Samuel, are you out there eavesdropping like your sister? After a moment's hesitation, the boy appeared in the doorway, his face flushed with embarrassment, but his eyes hopeful. Are you really going to stay forever, Miss Sophia? He asked, the most complete sentence she had heard from him yet. If that's what you all want, she said, her heart so full she thought it might burst. And if I do, you might have to start calling me something other than Miss Sophia. Like Mama? Emily suggested eagerly. Sophia glanced at Mason, uncertain how to respond. This was delicate territory. The children had lost their mother not so long ago. That's something we can figure out together, Mason said diplomatically. The important thing is that Sophia has agreed to become part of our family permanently. She'll be my wife and well, Whatever you feel comfortable calling her." Samuel approached the bed slowly, his young face solemn. "I remember my mama," he said, his voice quiet but clear. "I won't forget her. But I think she would like Miss Sophia to be our new mama. She always said family was the most important thing." Tears filled Sophia's eyes again as she opened her arms to the boy. After a moment's hesitation, he came to her, allowing himself to be embraced. Emily squirmed her way into the hug as well, and then Mason's arm came around all three of them, completing the circle. "I think that's settled then," he said, his own voice suspiciously rough. "We're going to be a family." The news of their engagement spread quickly through the community, generating reactions that ranged from genuine pleasure, the Wilsons and most of the neighboring farmers, to barely concealed disapproval, Mrs. Fletcher and her circle. Mason and Sophia paid little attention to the gossip, too absorbed in their newfound happiness and the practical arrangements for their future. They decided on a simple ceremony in mid-August, giving them time to plan, but not so long that it would seem they were hesitating. Mrs. Wilson immediately offered her home for the reception, and Pete Lawson, to everyone's surprise, revealed that he had been a minister before, finding his true calling with cattle. "You're ordained?" Mason asked incredulously. "Licensed by the Methodist Church back in Pennsylvania," Pete confirmed with a grin. "Haven't practiced in 15 years, but the paperwork's still valid. I checked when I came west, figuring folks out here might need marrying from time to time." The preparations were simple by necessity. Frontier weddings rarely involved elaborate arrangements, but meaningful. Sophia, with Mrs. Wilson's help, sewed a new dress of pale blue cambric, simple but becoming. The children were beside themselves with excitement. Emily practicing her role as flower girl with solemn dedication, Samuel proudly accepting the responsibility of carrying the rings. 2 days before the wedding, a letter arrived from Redemption Creek. It was addressed to Sophia and contained an unexpected surprise: the deed to a small parcel of land on the outskirts of town that had belonged to her former landlord, Mr. Hollister. "He died last month," Mrs. Parker had written. "No family to speak of. Left most of his property to the saloon owner, but specifically designated this piece for you. Said something about making amends for harsh judgment. It's not worth much now with the mine closed, but it's legally yours." "I can't believe it," Sophia said, showing the letter to Mason. "He was so cold when he evicted me." "Perhaps he had regrets afterward," Mason suggested. "Or maybe he saw something in the paper about our engagement and felt you deserved a wedding gift. Whatever his reasons, it's the first thing I've owned outright since my father's financial ruin," she said wonderingly. "It's not much, but it's something I can bring to our marriage." Mason took her hands in his. "You're bringing everything that matters: your heart, your mind, your strength. This family doesn't need land or money from you, Sophia. We just need you." The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright. Mrs. Wilson and several other women had arrived early to help decorate the ranch house and prepare food for the celebration afterward. The ceremony itself would take place under the large cottonwood tree by the creek, a spot Mason had chosen for its beauty and significance. It had been Miriam's favorite place on the ranch. As Sophia dressed in her room, Emily watching with rapt attention, a knock came at the door. "Who is it?" Sophia called, assuming it was Mrs. Wilson with the wildflower bouquet they had gathered that morning. "It's me," Samuel's voice came through the door. "Can I come in? I have something." Sophia opened the door to find the boy standing there, unusually smart in his best clothes, holding a small package wrapped in brown paper. "This is for you," he said, extending the package. "Uncle Mason helped me make it, but it was my idea." Touched, Sophia unwrapped the gift to find a small wooden frame containing a sketch, a surprisingly skilled rendering of herself, with Mason, Emily, and Samuel all seated by the fireplace in the living room. "Samuel, did you draw this?" she asked, amazed by the detail and sensitivity of the portrait. He nodded, a flush of pride coloring his cheeks. "Uncle Mason says I have a gift for it, like my mama did. She used to draw all the time." "It's beautiful," Sophia said sincerely. "The most thoughtful gift I've ever received." She knelt to embrace him, careful not to crease her dress. "Thank you." "Does this mean you're happy to be our new mama?" he asked, his voice muffled against her shoulder. "Happier than I can say," she assured him, her heart full to bursting. The ceremony itself was simple, but deeply moving. Mason waited under the cottonwood tree, tall and handsome in his best suit, his expression a mixture of joy and something like awe as Sophia walked toward him across the sun-dappled grass. Emily preceded her, scattering wildflower petals with more enthusiasm than precision, while Samuel walked beside Sophia, having asked if he might give her away since she had no father to do so. Pete Lawson performed the ceremony with unexpected dignity, his rough cowboy's voice taking on a resonant quality as he spoke of love, commitment, and the building of a family. When it came time for the vows, Mason took both of Sophia's hands in his blue eyes never leaving her face. "I, Mason Edwards, take you, Sophia Zimmerman, to be my lawfully wedded wife," he began, his voice steady and sure, "to have and to hold, from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." When it was her turn, Sophia's voice trembled slightly with emotion, but grew stronger with each word. "I, Sophia Zimmerman, take you, Mason Edwards, to be my lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." Samuel presented the ring's simple gold bands that Mason had ordered from Denver, and as Mason slipped the ring onto Sophia's finger, he added words that weren't part of the traditional ceremony. "With this ring, I offer you not just my name and my home, but my heart and my future. Whatever life brings us, we'll face it together, rich in the love we share." Tears spilled down Sophia's cheeks as she placed the matching band on his finger. "And I promise to cherish that love above all other riches, to build our family with strength and kindness, and to walk beside you through whatever joys and sorrows come our way. By the power vested in me," Pete concluded, his own eyes suspiciously bright, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Mason, you may kiss your bride." The kiss was brief but tender, mindful of their audience, but it sealed a bond that both knew would last a lifetime. The celebration afterward was joyous, with plenty of food, music from a fiddle player among the ranch hands, and dancing that continued well into the evening. Even Samuel joined in, allowing his new mother to teach him a simple two-step. As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the ranch yard, Mason found Sophia watching Emily twirl in her flower-strewn dress, the child's laughter carrying on the warm summer air. "Happy, Mrs. Edwards?" he asked, slipping an arm around her waist. "Completely," she assured him, leaning into his embrace, "though it still sounds strange to hear that name." "You'll get used to it," he promised. "We have a lifetime for you to practice." "A lifetime," she echoed, savoring the words. "It's more than I ever dared hope for when I was facing eviction in Redemption Creek." "It's what you deserve," he said firmly. "A home, a family, a future secure in love." As they stood together watching the celebration, Sophia thought of the journey that had brought her to this moment, the loss of her parents, the struggle to survive, the desperate situation that had led her to accept a position at a remote ranch with a taciturn cowboy and his orphaned niece and nephew. What had seemed like the end of her hopes had proven to be only the beginning of a new, more fulfilling life. "They said I was too poor to bring anything to a marriage," she murmured, recalling Mrs. Fletcher's cutting remarks. Mason turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "And what do we say to that?" Sophia smiled up at her husband, her heart overflowing with love for him, and for the children who were now truly hers. "That we're rich in the ways that matter most." "Exactly," he agreed, and sealed the truth of it with a kiss. Epilogue. 5 years later. The Double Star Ranch had prospered in the 5 years since Mason and Sophia Edwards had married. The barn, rebuilt stronger than before after the fire, now housed twice as many horses. The cattle herd had grown, new pastures had been fenced, and the ranch house itself had expanded to include additional bedrooms and a dedicated schoolroom where Sophia now taught not only Samuel and Emily, but also 3-year-old James, her and Mason's son, and occasionally the children of neighboring homesteaders. The schoolroom had been Mason's gift to her on their first anniversary, a surprise that had moved Sophia to tears. "Every teacher should have a proper classroom," he had told her, showing her the newly built addition with its large windows, comfortable desks, and walls lined with bookshelves. Samuel, now 13, had developed into a serious, thoughtful young man with a genuine talent for art and a deep understanding of the ranch's operations. Under Mason's patient guidance, he was learning to be a rancher, though Sophia quietly harbored hopes that he might someday study art formally. His drawings, increasingly sophisticated, adorned many of the walls in the ranch house. Emily, at 11, was a bright, talkative girl who divided her time between helping Sophia with her younger brother and exploring the ranch on her pony. Buttercup a gift from Mason on her 9th birthday. She had her mother's gift for sewing and had already pieced together a small quilt for James's bed. And James, named for Mason's father, was the image of his father, sturdy, blue-eyed, and already showing the same quiet determination that characterized Mason. He followed his father everywhere when allowed, solemnly attempting to mimic Mason's movements and expressions. The community around them had changed as well. Redemption Creek had experienced a modest revival when a new mining operation opened 10 miles to the north, bringing workers and trade back to the town. Sophia's small parcel of land, once seemingly worthless, had appreciated in value enough that they had been able to sell it and purchase additional acreage adjacent to the Double Star. On a warm September afternoon, Sophia stood on the porch of the ranch house, watching as Mason, Samuel, and several hands drove a small herd of cattle into the newly fenced south pasture. Emily sat on the porch steps, sewing a doll's dress, while James napped in his bed inside. "They're back," Emily announced, setting aside her sewing as the riders approached the house. Mason dismounted with the easy grace of a lifetime in the saddle, removing his hat as he climbed the porch steps. His hair had more silver in it now, and the lines around his eyes had deepened, but to Sophia, he was more handsome than ever. "How did it go?" she asked as he bent to kiss her. "Better than expected. Samuel spotted a break in the fence we hadn't noticed. Probably saved us from losing half the herd to the North Ridge." He spoke with evident pride in his nephew. Samuel, still on his horse, ducked his head at the praise. "Uncle Pete would have seen it if I hadn't," he said modestly. "But you did see it, and that's what matters," Mason assured him. "You've got a good eye." As the men led their horses to the barn, Sophia linked her arm through Mason's. "He's growing up so fast," she observed. "Both of them are." "Too fast," Mason agreed, watching as Samuel helped Emily onto his horse for a short ride around the yard, the girls' laughter floating back to them on the breeze. "Hard to believe it's been 5 years since we married." 5 years, Sophia echoed, leaning her head against his shoulder. "The happiest years of my life." Mason turned to face her, his expression suddenly serious. "Do you ever regret it? Coming here, taking on 2 grief-stricken children, marrying a rough cowboy with more responsibilities than prospects?" "Never," she said firmly, reaching up to touch his face. "Not for a single moment. Even when things were tight that second year, when the drought nearly broke us. Even then." She smiled at the memory of their shared determination during that difficult time. "We faced it together, just as we promised we would." Mason pulled her close, his arms strong around her. "I thank God every day for sending you to us, Sophia. You made us whole again. And you gave me everything I'd lost hope of having: a home, a family, a purpose. And love," he added, his eyes warm as they met hers. "Don't forget that part." "Never," she promised, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. "That's the richest gift of all." From inside the house came the sound of James waking from his nap, his small voice calling, "Mama, Papa." "I'll get him," Mason offered, but Sophia shook her head. "Let's both go. I imagine he'll want to tell you all about the butterfly he saw this morning. In his opinion, it was quite possibly the most important event in human history." Mason laughed, the sound still as warming to her heart as it had been the first time she'd heard it. "Far be it from me to miss such a momentous report." As they walked into the house together, Sophia reflected on the journey that had brought them here, from her desperate situation in Redemption Creek to this life of purpose and love on the Double Star Ranch. She thought of the whispered judgments, the cutting remarks about her poverty, and the assumption that she had nothing of value to offer a man like Mason Edwards. How wrong they had been. The true wealth in life, she had discovered, wasn't measured in dollars or possessions, but in love freely given and joyfully returned, in the family they had built together, and in the home they had created a place of warmth, learning, and laughter. They were rich beyond measure in all the ways that truly mattered, and for that, Sophia was grateful beyond words.